Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. A great episode. A lot of things went down this episode. We're going to break it down. Obviously, Sherlock and Watson were already working on a case, which is interesting to me. Like, I'm skipping on, probably be just bouncing around. But for one, I can't believe that circled back into the plot the way it did, but I'll get to it when I get to it. But I always like that because it always seems like sometimes the cases they work at the beginning, I feel like I guess there are occasions where it ties into the main plot, but it just kind of like, yeah, this is what they were working on, and it's kind of its own thing. It's like, oh, but it just kind of helped out in the end. But like I said, I'll get to it when I get to it. Basically, there's another murder, and this murder takes place at Sherlock's. What was I thinking of? One of his the place where they have meetings and stuff. And it's this lady named Rachel, and it's like, oh, all the motive screams of Michael. There's an interesting thing they brought up this episode that I never realized myself. I thought was kind of interesting. The rubber tubing that some of the victims were strangled with is very reminiscent of the tubing used to tighten off, for a heroin addict. And I was like, oh my God, that's such an interesting detail. I mean, him having struggled with heroin himself. It's just kind of interesting to me that they tied that together like that. Like, probably like you could have pieced that together before, but it's just like, until Sherlock pointed it out, I would have never noticed that. I thought that was kind of a fascinating detail. And it's just so interesting because it's like, yeah, everyone's like, it's got to be Michael. The FBI's coming to this. Like Bell even kind of calls the FBI out for it because it's like they didn't do their due diligence because they had kept an eye on Michael's place for a while, but like a month ago they kind of lacked up a little bit of the like watch on his place just because it's like, oh, he's going dormant, and they cut back for money reasons and stuff like that. Which even Watson kind of doesn't blame them too much because like Michael's very crafty, kind of got in and out of the city however he can, so it's kind of like not really that big of a deal to think that that he kind of found the weak spot to kind of slip in through. What's interesting is that they get help from everyone a couple times throughout the episode, but it's like Malik from the beginning was like, don't even joke about working with a hacker group. It's like, for one, it's like, no, he's not joking. They've helped him on multiple occasions, but for her, it's like she didn't want anything to potentially taint this case in any shape or form. So just like, okay, finding people is what we do best. And Sherlock's like, okay, when you find them, I'll have built up a great case against them because that's what I do. And that's the sad thing about this whole situation, because Sherlock blames himself the most for all of this, especially Rachel, because it's like, there are more victims because I didn't see Michael for who he really was. He wouldn't be around and free. Like, there are two extra victims out there because, it was Gregson's daughter, Hannah, her friend, wasn't it Maddie? Like she died. That was his way of trying to get Sherlock to notice even more. And for one, that could have ended up being Hannah. But he blames himself for all that because he didn't see Michael for who he was. Because there's another guy in this episode named William who ends up being a friend of Michael. He's very defending Michael. He's like, there's no way he's a killer. He's such a good person. You guys are harassing him. It's because of his past and blah, blah, blah that you judge him like that, which is like, literally one of the people working this case, Sherlock, literally struggles with the same addiction issue. So how can you be like, oh, they're using his past against him? It's like, no, they work with a man who has a past himself, so they know about people. It never came up in conversation, but I'm like, that was kind of like, because part of me was wondering, like, was he legitimately helping out Michael? He gave an excuse for like the almost 10,000 that he pulled out from, but it turns out that was in fact for his maid. But it's like, I was like, okay, so on some level he is still helping Michael. The reason why he's so in disbelief that Michael would be involved or whatever. We ended up finding out later on why he believes that, because Michael was there to help him, William and William's husband, Ray, who Ray had slipped, they had both gotten sober, and then Ray kind of slipped, and William took him to meetings where they met Michael, but, eventually Ray ended up killing himself because, it's like, oh, I couldn't keep myself clean. And they ended up kind of piecing it together later on that Michael ended up killing Ray, which ultimately he did, and he faked it and made it look like a suicide. Because in his own weird, twisted way, Michael does think he's helping people with addictions. Like, he kicked his own addiction, and, keeping busy and killing and stuff like that kind of helps him kind of kick his addiction too. And so he's trying to use his own skill set to help people. Like he is Sherlock. How he's trying to help Sherlock is the same way he helped Ray, because it's like, oh, I remove the potential and temptation of slipping back into that old avenue of doing drugs and stuff because the person you love and your husband is doing it too. He would have dragged you down if I hadn't killed him. So it's like you're better off alone than with him, and I'm there to kind of console you and be there for you. So like I say, in his own twisted way, he's trying to help, just like Sherlock, because he's like, I'm actually the reason why you got better. Sherlock's, no, I got better because I got time away. He's like, yeah, and I'm the reason why you had that time away. I gave you that time away because I stopped killing, so you wouldn't have to worry about focusing on me, and you could focus on getting better. So it's like, and it's almost, I'm sure also the way he's kind of phrasing it, it's like, well, if I wasn't in your way, you wouldn't have wanted to get better so that you could be in good condition to catch me. And that's even something Sherlock I talked about. He's like, when him and Michael first met, it's like, yo, I wasn't in the best condition, but now I'm back and I'm pieced together. And the fact of the matter is Michael is going down because he underestimated who going up against. Once again, I am surprised it didn't come up in this season a lot more than it did, his whole concussion syndrome situation, because I thought that was going to play a bigger role, like him hallucinating stuff. But I guess like because they dealt with it in season 5, they weren't going because it played a big part in season 5 in that regard to his story. I guess it wasn't something they really felt like they needed to kind of play around with even more. But I was highly expecting that to be something because I thought that was going to be used against Sherlock when it comes to this whole Michael situation. Like, because Michael plays with it a little bit because he's like, oh yeah, the condition you were in when I brought you to the hospital, you could have been delusional and stuff like that. You were kind of out of it. He didn't directly talk about, I mean, that was kind of a part of the play in his condition and stuff like that. Sure, but not like the direct correlation of like him hallucinating. But it's just kind of like, oh, you're in the hospital, you're kind of in bad shape, you're kind of in and out. So it's kind of like, oh, anything I said, like who's to really say that I was behind all them. But it is kind of interesting. There was a part of me that kind of caught that ahead of time in the episode. I was like, Michael didn't kill Rachel, did he? Just the way he was like, oh yeah, the person who did this was killed out of anger and stuff like that. And also the fact is that, he was like, I'm here to help with Rachel. I'm like, why? Because he came specifically for Rachel. So it's like, he's not, when you look at that in retrospect, it's just like, yeah, he really wasn't there. He was really there legitimately in his own way. Because I think as, taking pride in his sadistic work, it's like, yeah, there's a copycat out there, which turned out to be the case and everything. But I did like Sherlock being like, you don't want to help anymore. He's like, I came here for Rachel, not all this other stuff. And then Sherlock's like, well, don't worry, I'm here to help you. Because the fact of the matter is, I don't know what kind of pain caused you to go through what you're doing and killing all these innocent people, but do know, I'm going to put an end to that pain for you. I'm like, ooh, Sherlock. It gets you all giddy and stuff like that. But then it's like, okay, is it a cop? Is it someone from the NYPD? Is it an FBI agent? Like, who's behind this situation? Who could be this copycat killer? And I love like the twist and turn in the whole thing because it ends up being the judge. I was wondering if the judge on some level was connected because she kept coming up with lame excuses as to not get them the warrants they wanted. She was like, which I guess it makes sense because it's just like they didn't have the evidence they needed to back up, because nothing was like concrete to be like, oh yeah, it's definitely Michael. So I was like, is she connected to Michael in some shape or form? Is he kind of connected to her and she's kind of like making it harder for them to do their job? It seems like no, it wasn't the case. It seems like I guess she's just a hard judge to please because she's like, yeah, I'm following the letter of the law, but she kind of gave them a little leeway in some regards when it came to the whole Albany thing, which is interesting because even Watson was like, wait, so one of the places he was at was in Albany. The place he was chilling at this entire when Sherlock was away was Albany. And he made sure not to be too far away because he wanted to be probably in close enough proximity that when he hears that Sherlock's back, he's like, oh, boom, I'm ready to come back, so. Because it was the case, like, wasn't it like 2 episodes ago that made Michael go like, okay, that was his way to know that. Because Sherlock, it wasn't like a public thing. Like, no one would publicly be like, oh yeah, Sherlock's back full in action. But I forgot right because he ended up stealing some files of Sherlock's. That's what ended up letting him know that Sherlock was good again. That's what it was. I was trying to remember what the circumstances were. I thought it was like the case they were working on. It's beside the point. Like I was misremembering things, but nevertheless. So it's kind of interesting, but the twist being that the judge was the one behind it. I didn't see that coming. I was like, oh, what? Because the moment he was like, oh, Daniel, whatever the dude's last name is, and Sherlock's like, who is that dude? It's like, that the judge who denied us the warrant and everything, that's her husband. Because it turns out Rachel was having an affair with her husband. She found out and she killed her. Because Michael had even said it himself, like, whoever killed Rachel did it out of anger. And the thing is, the judge, she knew all the details from the previous warrant they tried to get for Michael that she denied them. So she just used that as a means to kind of cover everything up. So, she was like, well, the fact of the matter is all that stuff you have on me, like none of that's really concrete. You don't have any 100% proof, but Gregson does kind of talk to her. It's like, if you do this, you're going to muddy up the case. No matter what you might think, like, might not let us get the evidence we needed, but we know that Michael is like a terrible human of a monster, not just terrible monster in general. And so if you let this kind of slide the way it is, you're going to screw up the entire case. There will be no closure for the victims, the family members of the victims of Michael's. And the fact of the matter is so many people are going to not get justice because of you doing this. So do the right thing, which she takes a plea deal, kind of admitting what she did, because I guess on some twisted level, in her own way, she is trying to be honorable too, because even though she committed this act out of anger and stuff like that, she's kind of a terrible person. But the fact of the matter is, like, she's trying to at least get some leeway with it by doing this, kind of, I guess, ease her own consciousness a bit, balance the scales, I guess, in her mind. But it is kind of interesting because the twisted thing is, Michael's alibi for Rachel's murder ended up being the fact is that he was stalking another victim. They've never actually specified, because we never figured out, because that's something he hasn't really let loose, was like why he specifically chose the victims that he chose. And so we still kind of don't know about that. Like, we don't know what really set Michael off, like why he chose his victim, why he kind of went about things the way he did, kind of became the serial killer that he did, so it's kind of, it's just sad and twisted and messed up and interesting that the fact is that was his alibi, because he was kind of working on another potential victim. And then just all those photos, like, because he had at least 4 victims in particular he had lined up, people that he was like, who he had followed over the course of multiple days. Some of the women, it was like one day, but other women, it was like multiple days. So he was definitely had his eyes set on at least 4 different women that were going to potentially be victims. So there's that at very least. So they were probably in the process of getting a lot of those people identified anyway, just to, keep an eye out for them. So that there was some good that came about that situation. So, but the twist I didn't see coming, because part of me was like, oh, there's a lot of time left on this episode. And I was like, okay, there's quite a bit of time left on this episode. It's like, what's going to go down? And it's like, Michael coming after Joan. I didn't see that come. I was like, which is crazy, because I talked about it in the beginning of the season. I was like, at the end of this, he's going to kidnap Joan or something like that, which is like, he never kidnaps people. He kind of kills them on the spot. So I don't know why I really thought like that, but I felt like that was going to be the twist, like the final push he was going to give Sherlock. But the reason why he came after Joan, he was like, I'm supposed to come and see you. I wanted to meet with you anyway, but the reason why he came after her, because he blamed her because William OD'd because of learning what Watson revealed to him. It all clicked and became clear to him, and it was too much, because when Watson revealed it to him, he's like, I it doesn't mean I'm not going to help you. I just need time. And I was like, I didn't cross my mind to think that he would do something. He ended up contacting Michael, which I wish he hadn't, but that kind of put Michael on the spot of Joan to figure out, like, oh yeah, Joan's the one that visited him and told him all that stuff, because he defended Michael so much, because Michael was there by his side during him and Ray, and he was there for me, because he even admitted it, like, it was Michael who had said that there were signs that Ray was suicidal, but William didn't see those signs. And so now it's like, oh, a man who was 12 years sober, he was good, he was fine, and then you had to screw things up because you had to get in his way and stuff like that, because you set him off. So once again, his twisted moral compass is like, this coming from the guy who kills people, this coming from the guy that killed his husband in the first place. But in his mind, it's like, I helped him, I got him right on the right path, which is like, yeah, I killed him. And he's coming after Joan, beating on her. I'm like, oh man, Sherlock's not going to get there in time. I was like, crap, he messed with the damn door and everything. But luckily, and what I was talking about earlier, that circles back around, is like, she had a piece of equipment from the plane that was in her room and stabs him with. I'm like, yeah. Like I said, it's never circled back in a sense like that. So I thought that was kind of good. And Sherlock is beating himself up about it again and again, because it's like he blames himself, because it's like, once again, this is someone he loves and cares about so deeply got involved in this, because if I had taken down Michael sooner, none of this would be happening right now. You wouldn't have gotten injured, having like 2 fractured ribs, almost potentially, some swelling and stuff, like almost having a concussion and stuff too. So it's like, he can't help but blame himself, because it does make you also wonder, what does this mean going forward for him? Like, potentially, like, what this means for their relationship. Like, obviously, because I think this might make Sherlock look at things a little differently going forward, especially with the whole storyline with Joan wanting to be a mom and everything and wanting to adopt and everything. So I think this whole thing might put things in a little different perspective for him, because this isn't the first time Jones kind of got caught up in all this stuff because of their work. Him being a target is one thing, but Watson being one, I think, is a completely different story, especially with the life she's trying to start and everything. And I think that might change how Sherlock perceives things going forward. Potentially, I don't know. Because that's a rocky boat, because all the people in his life kind of balance things out for Sherlock, you know? So if things happen where Joan wouldn't be as... She'd still be in his life, but not to this extent, you know, depending on what she decides to do going forward. Because Kitty kind of left the detective work behind because she had a child, you know? So, you know, maybe that potentially would happen with Watson too, or at least, you know, that because that would take more priority over her being a detective, her detective work potentially. That question hasn't really come up before now, and I'm sitting here thinking about it, like what she would potentially do. But the reason why I'm like circling all that is just because, you know, like I said, Sherlock just blames himself about this whole, you know, Michael thing. And then there's the twist at the end where we find out Michael is dead. I would have thought like Grayson's like, no, you have to stay away from this. I was like, oh yeah, because they think you're the number one suspect, don't they? It's like they think Watson is. I'm like, what? That's crazy. But I guess it's just like, as the latest person to be at his hands, like, oh, you know who he is, and the fact is he came after you and almost hurt you. We're seeking revenge. It's going to be the thought process they have. The way they got that set up too is probably like Watson probably won't have a good enough alibi, because there'll probably be a time where she would have been left alone. But then I'm sure it could end up shifting over to Sherlock. Hell, Sherlock might even point things in his direction just so they take it off Joan, because it's like, after everything she's already been through, the last thing she needs is a stress of the FBI probing through her life, trying to see if she's the killer behind this. But yeah. There's many different people who it can be, but I think the most obvious choice, because I mean, like I said, there's victims of the families and stuff like that, but the most obvious choice, fucking Moriarty. Because for one, we know she takes a very special interest in Joan. Like, Joan and Sherlock are very important to her. And we saw what happened to the last person that tried to come after Joan. Moriarty handled that, even behind bars. We're talking about Moriarty, who's free too. I mean, doesn't mean she had to do it herself. She probably hired someone to do it. There's that lady who's kind of Moriarty's representative. It's, like I said, it's the actress who plays Megan in Outcast. Which we've only seen her that one time, but I mean, the fact of the matter is Moriarty has the power and reach that she has. She could have easily hired anyone to get it done. But I was like, that's the most obvious thing. It's like, oh, you're coming after what? Like, it's like, okay, you have your little game with Sherlock. Okay, sure. But he crossed the line the moment he came after Joan. So that's where my mind immediately goes. I don't think that might be where Sherlock goes, especially because I was curious to see how they were going to tie those all together, because they still have that storyline at the back burner while we still also have like this in the forefront. But I wasn't expecting Michael to die. Like, I was not expecting that. That kind of caught me off guard. I was like, oh, I thought you'd be like in a finale or something. There was a part of my brain that was wondering if those two storylines would cross in that regard, whether like Moriarty would be the one to kind of take him out of the picture, just because it's like, oh yeah, you're just kind of getting in my way. Me and Sherlock's time, our whole deal, the whole thing between her and Moreland, you know, and the whole Cabal situation. So that's where my mindset is. Like, it could be anyone, but like at the top of the list is Moriarty. She has to be the one behind this. So next week's episode is in fact the season finale, which is weird. Kind of caught me off guard, but I ended up finding, yeah, apparently this season is like kind of on the shorter side. I know they ordered more episodes, but I didn't know like in what regard it was going to be. I guess this was going to be on the shorter side of this season anyway, but it's like 21 episodes. Typically these are like 24, right? So that was kind of interesting, but nevertheless, I'm very excited to see how this all wraps up, because there is still one storyline open. I mean, granted, we're closing out Michael's storyline, but I think it would have been better if Sherlock would have been able to kind of take him down. But it's like, man, someone so confident and stuff, like taking out like off screen like that is kind of crazy. But it's kind of interesting too when you actually think about it. It's just kind of an interesting thing to note. Kind of similar thing happened with the whole Shinwell situation to a certain degree. Remember, because Shinwell like died like what, like the last episode of season 5, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's just kind of interesting, like that certain story, like these back-to-back storylines of like he had the person mainly connected to, especially because like Shinwell popped up a lot in season 5. Like Michael was not in this season a lot. There was quite a bit of time he was just like gone, obviously because Sherlock was getting better and stuff like that. So This is our first time seeing him physically pop up in this show in a while, so it's just kind of interesting when you actually break it down and think it like that. I guess when you look back on retrospect, maybe he did pop up a lot more than you kind of think about, but nevertheless, like I said, I'm very interested. Like I said, I'm all over the place. I do apologize. Great episode. I'm so interested to see how what goes down in the season finale. It's going to be crazy. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good